All right, what's up, everybody? We have a couple of people that are joining, and we are recording already. So we also like to be timely. So we'll go ahead and give, kind of get started, but we'll start slowly to give time for more people to join. I am joined here by longtime friend of mine and contact Humza Khan, who now is working at Northbeam doing awesome stuff. And so we'll go through that. But I think incrementality is one of these things that so many of us have questions about, and it feels like no matter what you do, it's not the right thing. More than anything, I think today is about making sure, understanding incrementality and how to, if you're going to do a test, what that looks like, how to make it effective, the things to consider, um, and go from there. So that's kind of what we're going to be covering today. But I think we're good. We can go ahead and get started. Hamza, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and walk through the deck, we will. And at any time, feel free to ask questions. It's not a huge group of us on here, and we can definitely answer those as we go through this.
Perfect. Sweet. Nice to meet everybody. Let's see if this works. Slideshow. Sweet. Um, so like Andrew said, I'm Humza here at Northbeam. We just launched our incrementality suite, and that's sort of what I'm here to talk through. If This is me. We work with hundreds of brands all over the country, all over the world, helping them to best understand the impact of their ad dollars, not just through incrementality, but through multi-touch attribution as well as media mix modeling. Andrew, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself again.
Yeah, so I run a founders community of people that are either D2C, they run ads in D2C e-commerce on Meta or Google, or they do CRO. So I run the founders community. It's the biggest community of direct response digital marketers that are meta forward in the world. I co-host the Scalability School podcast, which Northbeam is a great sponsor of. So we've done a ton of stuff with Northbeam because Northbeam is really the standard, right, for a lot of serious digital marketers, and so that's one of the things I love, and that's who I am. Feel free to ask any questions to me as we go through this, but yeah, let's rock and roll.
Sweet. I like to start by defining incrementality. It feels like over the years, everyone's definition has changed. And so when we think about it here at Northbeam, it's the additional growth that comes directly from specific marketing actions. And so a lot of people will come to us and say, hey, maybe I'm already using an MTA. I know the answer to that question. And our response is MTA assigns credit. It is not proving causation. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to answer is how effective are the dollars you are spending on any specific channel at providing you the outcomes that you want. You could probably get away with without incrementality if you're a super sort of simple media mix brand. Like if you're only running on Facebook and Google, you could probably do some back of the paper math to figure this out. But as your media mix gets a lot more complex, things get a lot more complicated, and therefore a full suite makes a lot more sense. Um, Going through how we look to design and figure out incrementality, there are a few different ways you can go about this. Um, we at Northbeam use what we call a geo holdout, meaning we just divide up a country into different slices. In this case, we use DMAs. Um, and I compare it a lot to pharmacy testing. I don't know why that's something that sticks in my brain that I learned, I think, in high school, but the idea being we take a certain percentage of your target audience and we stop serving them ads. We then compare the effectiveness of the group of people who were exposed to ads compared to the group of people who were not. From there, we can do some calculations to figure out your sort of incremental costs. Another way that this can be done is through audience holdouts. This is what like a Facebook or a Google would do. They would look to, instead of doing it by region, just hold out a specific percentage of users sort of all over the country. This sounds really cool. I thought it was very exciting when I was a baby media buyer and first exposed to this. Um, but the issues we often run into those is the setups are proprietary, and so they're not super easily translatable across different platforms. You can't necessarily compare apples to oranges in this case. Um, and then the other thing we often think about too is repeatability. And so, because of the proprietary nature, it's hard to have a ton of confidence in being able to repeat those actions over and over again. Um, and the last type is what we would call like a blackout or just a full pause of a specific channel. Um, Not one I typically recommend, mostly because I think we all are responsible for continued growth, despite the fact that we're looking to run a lot of these tests. Um, and so sort of the option of last resort from my experience, but sweet. Um, and then thinking about why this matters in 2026, a lot of it is because marketing is responsible for revenue. At the end of the day, we are sort of bridging the gap between marketing, finance, and C-suite strategy in terms of growing the business. There's also a lot of signal loss going on. iOS 14.5, cookie deprecation, a ton of different sort of walled gardens are eroding visibility. We could talk about how there are a lot of sort of marketplaces that make it really tough for us to track effectiveness, thinking about like your Amazons, your Walmarts, even your TikTok shops. Um, and then the other reason why we really like it is can become really helpful in scaling new channels reliably. Let's say that we're testing out something relatively new. I'm thinking about like an app loving or even maybe a CTV where measurement is kind of hard. Testing these new channels with a sort of incrementality structure to it can help us feel a lot more confident before we let it rip in terms of budgets. Cool. Some of the things that we can answer with incrementality testing, not just simply how effective a specific platform may be, is we can start to validate new strategies. Um, Andrew may know this, but I do not believe in awareness plays whatsoever. And so one of my first things when I'm working with a brand to do is to try and prove that out through an incrementality test. Um, those can be very fun. We could also structure incrementality tests around specific bidding strategies, creative types, or offers. Like you name it, we could probably come up with a test format that works. The other thing, going back to my Amazon example, is quantifying halo effects. When you run an incrementality test with us, provided we have enough data, we can start to measure halo effects of Facebook on Amazon or TikTok on retail, which can be super powerful. And then the last point is we like to think of incrementality as sort of the third piece of our triangle offense, together with MTA and MMM. With all three, we can better train our MMM models to better forecast based on the results. Also, we can use our incrementality learnings to make better decisions within our MTA suite. Once we know the full impact of all the dollars we're spending, we can make adjustments on a level that we wouldn't be able to see with just MTA. Sweet. So, a bunch of different options for measuring incrementality. Of course, you could always go to a platform. You could try and bootstrap things as well and do things in-house. I know there's a ton of open source resources to help make that happen. The problems with that is you kind of have to be a bit of a data scientist to make it work. I've been guilty of trying to cloud code my way into bespoke incrementality tests, and it's a lot harder than I originally thought, at least. In platform, again, runs within Facebook or Google or any one of their suites. Not necessarily the most translatable tests or repeatable. The other thing I often say is, why would you let a platform grade their own homework? Versus the sort of independent third party, which I would consider us to be one of those. You get a platform that sort of automates a lot of the test design and execution for you. We also monitor our tests throughout the flight. I'm not sure if anybody else has been in this situation where you're waiting, 6, 8 weeks for the results of an incrementality test, and then it becomes inconclusive, which is super frustrating. The Northbeam incrementality tooling actually checks in on your test on a daily basis to let you know if things are sort of getting off the rails, or perhaps maybe you were doing some ad ops yesterday, you spun up a new ad set, and you forgot to apply exclusions. Our system will go in there and apply those for you, so that if we ever do reach a point where we think we're going to have an inconclusive test, we can have a discussion about, hey, do we want to make adjustments to get things back on track? Perhaps performance is just going bonkers, and we've decided we can wait for to run this test another day. Let's capitalize on this moment. Um, and so we think we are the most agile and flexible platform out there in terms of incrementality. Sweet. So, some tips for operationalizing incrementality. A lot of this comes down to understanding what exactly you are trying to answer. Um, a lot of In the past, at least when I was agency side, we would run a lot of incrementality tests and then we would see the results and it would be a kind of, so what? Like, what do we do with this information? Here at Northbeam, we actually look to kind of flip that on its head. Rather than just saying, let's run an incrementality test, we'll always start with an objective. Are we trying to just measure baseline performance on a specific channel? Are we trying to stress test a channel? Maybe we're trying to figure out if incremental attribution on Facebook is actually outperforming sort of standard attribution. And so from there, what we will then do is leverage a ton of our MTA data to essentially create geo holdouts for you. The cool thing about our geo holdouts is, because of our MTA data, we can actually make holdouts typically smaller than you would with a lot of other tools. If I remember correctly, like a lot of times Facebook in platform will benchmark to like a 10% holdout, 15%, somewhere in there. Here at Northbeam, I've been seeing tests in the single digits. And the other part of that too is not only are the holdouts smaller, but we can run the test for a shorter period of time because of that granular data. Um, and then I think the other thing is that becomes really difficult is maintaining the sanctity, if that's the right word, of a test. Um, it's running in the background for, let's call it 6 weeks. We're kind of going about our daily business. We're launching new creative. We're optimizing our ad accounts. It's really easy for us to forget that we're running a test and all of a sudden break it. And that's honestly, in my opinion, the coolest feature about incrementality here at Northbeam is we take all of that sort of um, we dot your I's and cross your T's for you. Sweet. Other common problems we see with incrementality, the manual setup, like I was talking about before, making sure that you've got all your holdouts in place, doing a lot of the sort of math, statistics, especially when you're trying to project out how long you need to run a test. It can be a lot of guesswork. We take a lot of that away. Um, Confounding effects. This is really just making sure that the test is going as expected. For a variety of reasons, things can shift out from under you. Perhaps a different platform that we're not testing all of a sudden sort of takes off and sort of breaks what we were expecting. Therefore, we've just wasted like weeks and probably a ton of dollars in an invalid test. And then the last is pointless results. Just because you ran a test and it gave you a number doesn't necessarily mean a ton in isolation. I think the real power of incrementality is understanding what the number means for us day to day and how we can use that to further improve our efforts. Sweet. Again, benefits with us. The test designs themselves. Whenever you come to us to generate a test, we run thousands of simulations in the background, and we try and distill it to 2 to 4 different options for you. What I've been seeing is it really kind of fluctuates between would you rather run a faster test with a slightly larger holdout or a slower test with a slightly smaller holdout? Um, Automated integrity, we handle all of the budget shifts, targeting edits, on a daily basis to make sure things stay on track. And then afterwards, we're able to take the results, kind of break it down into what they mean, and move them over into MTA and MMM to give you more insight in your day-to-day optimizations. Our MMM learns a lot when we feed it a incrementality test, and then we will also start to help you benchmark your day-to-day ad ops within MTA based on the incremental effects of any specific test. Sweet. I ran through that incredibly fast. And so I'm happy to answer any questions from the chat or Andrew, if there's anything specific you wanted to cover.
Yeah, well, thanks for going through that. I mean, I think so many of us, right, have worked with clients to set up incrementality tests, or have kind of like know it's something that needs to happen, and know the value of them, but you kind of, I think the model has been you take it and you hand it off to somebody, say, hey, run this for me. And I think we're now in the phase of let's understand this more completely of what this actually does. When people go about setting up, you talked about some of the common errors that you see, um, and you talked about setting expectations. What are the things that you're talking through, like that you're all right, let's set this, what these are the expectations. The expectations are we're hoping that a channel is more incremental than we think, or we hope there's more connection between this connected TV and this, it's like, what are some of those things you're walking through with people?
Yeah. First, I like to say that there's the only bad test is an inconclusive test. Even if we were to say test Facebook and it's not as incremental as we thought, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad thing. It's just a learning that we can operationalize. So maybe that means we split budgets out somewhere else. But to kind of bring this all back to your question, I think what it really comes down to is trying to understand what do we get after? Are we just trying to understand how effective Facebook is? Are we are we trying to quantify our maybe even like linear TV spend, something that's incredibly hard to figure out, or CTV, YouTube is a common example for me. Um, and so there's a lot we can get into. But I think the first couple of things are what are we trying to answer? And then how understanding the why the test is structured a certain way. I think a lot of people get scared when you say we're going to hold out a portion of your reach. I would argue unless you're spending millions of dollars, it's not a big deal. But we can walk through some of that math for you to make sure
I
that
mean,
it doesn't impact the business. But
yeah, what
sorry.
do you tell people? I mean, I've heard answers from you guys and from other vendors that do stuff too. Like, what do you tell people generally? I'm just curious of your personal answer of like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
look,
yeah.
like we're not going to show ads to people. What do you mean?
Yeah, I think one of the things I go back to, and my numbers are might show my age, is the idea of like 10 years ago, a 1% lookalike on Facebook was like 1.2 million people.
Right.
The second you optimize for purchase, you're serving to maybe 15% of that audience, roughly. And so uh ultimately what I end up saying is there are very few advertisers out there who are reaching the entire platform with their media dollars. And
Yeah.
so holding out a couple percentages isn't going shouldn't make or break your business. The other thing, and I wish we had some screenshots in the deck, is when you run it through our tool, we'll specifically show you what regions we think should be held out. And the way we do it is by creating what we call digital twins of some of your most impactful regions.
Hmm.
The example we used internally during one of our trainings was perhaps DFW behaves a lot like Philadelphia, and so we will just hold out Philadelphia. I took huge offense to that, being from Dallas and a Cowboys fan. But that's the general idea is we can find large DMAs that maybe do a ton of your volume and match them to smaller DMAs that don't really do a ton for you day to day and still get quantifiable results out of it.
I think so much of it is having it in one place is huge, right? And I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but before I do, meaning what I mean by that is that all of the testing and everything is within Northbeam, the tool you're already using. It makes it so much easier. You don't have to be a Northbeam user to run an incrementality test with you guys, but it sure makes it a heck of a lot easier. We'll get to that in a minute. But there's been these things from Meta or Google about sort of lift testing, like Meta's conversion lift study or Google's experiments. How does this compare to to those? I mean, obviously it's more robust in terms of the test. The ongoing monitoring is a huge one. What are other ways that this compares to those?
Yeah, I think in terms of outcomes, it's actually pretty much the same. Like we're all trying to measure the same thing. It's the differences are in how we go about it. And I have nothing against Facebook. I'm going to pick on them a little bit here. I think it's awesome that they have self-serve lift testing. The problem then becomes how do I take my Facebook lift test results and compare that to what I see on Google? Because the methodologies are different, they're not necessarily comparable. We could maybe do some like back of the napkin math if we have a relatively simple media mix. But the second things get into like three or four different channels, it becomes a lot more important to have tests that you can repeat across platforms. Even if the holdouts are slightly different, as long as the methodology is the same, then we're on an equal playing field when comparing different platforms, strategies, whatever. I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Um, for we have a question actually that says for a brand on Meta and Google spending 1.5 million annually and has only ever relied on in-platform numbers. What's a good starting point for trying to understand the efficacy of our ads and where to allocate spend without having worked with an MTA and incrementality before?
Yeah. Um, the sales guys may hate me for saying this, but I think if that's your media spend in a year and your two main channels are Meta and Google, you could probably get away with working in platform. Um, the reason why I say that is because lift testing with third parties can get very expensive very quickly. I think we are priced below most of our competitors, but even then, um, like, is the juice worth the dollars for you? And so what I often say is having a sort of framework to or like a testing roadmap is the most important thing, right? First, you'll want to baseline your channel just to understand what it's doing today. And then the question then becomes, what changes do we want to make based on the information? Or maybe we don't want to make any changes. We just want to see how things progress over the next few months, and then we retest. Perhaps we decide that we want to go all in on incremental attribution within Facebook. Lift test it to see if it works. It is the um, it is the only way to understand like causal impacts versus attribution is just assigning credit out.
I mean,
Um,
I
I,
think, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if that really answers the question, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, I get this question a lot being in the founders community. A lot of people come in, look, I haven't used a third party. I need more direction. What do I do? You know, one I think is you using a third party tool is really helpful for measurement because it's going to give you more data than you will have in platform. So you're going to have just not only more data around like what the conversion looks like, but you're also going to have more understanding of path to purchase, and you're going to have a better understanding of what like a cycle of a person that's considering things looks like. So at a baseline, even if you don't do incrementality, this is going to be helpful for you. Just because the way that, I mean, Meta even updated their definition last week, right? Or of like how they define a conversion. And this kind of stuff's going to change. And so to a degree, like having a third party is going to be really helpful because, in utilizing Northbeam myself, like we have basically in some brands we'll work on off of a 1 day click, and then we'll have like a Northbeam multiplier that basically we know that if it says this in Northbeam, it's going to be actually, oh, we can times this by 1.7 over a period of time. And then that's like, it's something that we can scale. So I think that's one, it makes your life a lot easier to have it in one place as well. Um, the, the generally the data that comes from in platform two can be quite confusing sometimes and can change and can evolve, etc. So that's just like a general value proposition, I think, going through that. I think as we so and incrementality is one of these things that, as Humza said, as it gets more complex, you can sort of say like, okay, what can we do? When it gets really more complex, there just isn't necessarily a great incrementality testing is currently the best way to do this. And I think thus far the landscape has been like you hire a third party vendor to do this, and they do it and they run it and design the test, and then they give you this data. And it's all right, I think. And but you're basically left with like this, like, okay, we know this, and like it's a point in time as well, versus with Northbeams, like you can sort of have this being on an ongoing basis. So if you're a brand that's like, say you're spending, it's one's talking about 1.5 million annually, let's say you're spending 5 million annually, or you're privy to brands that are spending $5 million annually. um and you're starting on things like YouTube or TikTok or connected TV. Like all these things are very valid places to go, but you have to there it almost like you have to have a plan for incrementality testing as you're bringing those on, because otherwise it's really easy to burn through a ton of money and not know what you're doing, right, in these things. So like you have to have an incrementality backing as you start a new channel, or like a plan to make sure, because otherwise it's just not going to make a lot of sense for you.
yeah, yeah, I think of this all the time. Like, if we spin up YouTube and all of a sudden our blended numbers are going up, how do you know that it was YouTube that caused it and not some work you were doing on some other channel? Is really what it comes down to. And perhaps you are spending like 5 million across 6, 7 different channels. It's hard to figure out where to pull budget from or put more budget into should the need arise. And you can reference your incrementality results to better understand what you're going to get from investing more or investing less in a specific channel.
Just talk about channels that are more incremental that you've seen. I mean, you've seen a lot of incrementality tests. It feels like for a while, maybe a year and a half ago, that TikTok was fairly incremental for people. And I feel like that's shifted more recently, let's say in 2026, to YouTube being, or let's say Q4 25 into now, that YouTube is more incremental, particularly like YouTube Shorts. Uh, I don't know if you have any insight on that, of what other places you feel like are incremental that are helpful to go towards.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, App Levin's obviously one that shows incrementality, but I've also heard there's a lot of, sorry, Axon, but I've also heard there's a lot of overlap between Meta customers and Axon customers, so it's not as incremental as people think. If you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to know.
Yeah, I think starting with AppLovin, you're right. I don't necessarily think of it as a huge sort of user acquisition channel. I think of it as more of a mid-funnel play based on what we see. And so I've seen really good results on an incremental basis for brands that have a longer time to purchase, where it makes a lot of sense to get those impressions sort of mid through the funnel. I've seen other brands where their time to convert is like a couple of hours and not so incremental. Um, and so it's sort of a question of like what your sort of journey looks like. When I think about like sort of the shifts we've seen on TikTok because of the way our incrementality tooling works and the data we are privy to, one thing I've started to see is TikTok not nearly as incremental on D2C as it used to be, but it's increasingly becoming more effective on Amazon. Even for brands that aren't necessarily mentioning Amazon within their creative, we still see a pretty large halo effect from TikTok specifically.
Interesting. So it's like it generates this buzz that's like, okay, I'll just get it on Amazon type of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, right. Huh. Interesting. And YouTube is all right. It's been doing better. What's your take on that?
YouTube has been doing better as of recent, especially with demand gen campaigns and shorts. I'm going to be completely honest. I am the most bullish person at Northbeam on YouTube. I think it's the world's biggest streaming platform, and it makes perfect sense for anyone wanting to dip their toes into more top of funnel video. The toughest part has always been measurement. And so being able to come in with a even a relatively small test and say and come back with incremental results to show to your CFO, your CEO to prove that the channel works, I think is super powerful because everyone else is still trying to figure it out. And
Mhm.
so you're kind of first in that pool. So
So let's just talk about somebody's going through this. They're thinking about doing an incrementality test. I think we walked through, some of the common mistakes. What are the things that they need to have prepared, and that and that to make sure they're not making some of those common mistakes?
yeah, I think to sum it up in one word, it's or two words, it's a plan and commitment to that plan. Um, right. Any testing framework is a series of guardrails, and it's all about making those guardrails tall enough, if we can keep going with this metaphor, to where you don't spill over. And so with us, that's a lot of automated processes. If you're doing it sort of in-house solo, that's a lot of triple checking your work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we've all been guilty of making human mistakes, like adding an extra zero to a campaign budget or something like that. It's just bound to happen. And so the reason why I love working with a third party, whether it's us or someone else, is the support you get around making sure you didn't make a mistake.
Yeah, right. And I mean, so you're when people try to, you talked a little bit, you spoke to us a little bit about vibe coding, which we obviously everybody's sort of like, all right, I want to vibe code my own incrementality test or whatever. Um, you can get sort of far with it, I would say, right? But I think with you, like, what's your take on that? What have you seen? And then what is it now in terms of what you guys are doing that makes it even really that little bit more special sauce?
Yeah, I think two things is if you were to try and vibe code your own geolift test, you still have to understand like the basic principles of lift testing. You have to know what a minimal detective effect is and why it's important. Um, Power levels or P levels, kind of all that jargon that like the Facebook marketing science people like to throw at you after you run a test. You got to actually know what that means because Claude, for example, will just cave if you push back immediately and you've run a bunk test. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's still a ton of learning and knowledge that needs to be had. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second question you had.
No, I mean, I'm mostly just trying to see like of the people that if you're thinking about trying to build your own, what are the things that you guys do that really keeps people makes it
Yeah,
a better experience and a better test?
yeah. I think the answer to that is the amount of data we already have through our MTA tooling.
Mm-hmm.
Is we can be faster, smaller holdouts, a lot more agile than you would with a lot of other third parties. Um, Kind of what I was talking about in that sort of digital twin DMAs.
Sure.
If you didn't have that MTA data, essentially what you would have to do is just look at DMAs or states, look at it by volume, and then pick out basically a handful in different sort of quartiles or deciles, depending on how you decide to break things down. And so your any issues that may have come up with a holdout are just amplified
Mm-hmm.
because if California is your biggest state, imagine having to hold that out. That would suck.
Right.
And so the precision that comes with what we were able to do, I think, is the real difference maker.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, just having the peace of mind, right, that it's being monitored, everything that it as it's going is huge. You talked about the size of tests, so I think sometimes people think that it has to be a huge test with a lot of spent, like a lot of money. Why? How like it can be small. How small can it be based on the budget? Obviously, it's based on the budget that you have, but like, what does that look like in terms of, right? Look, we want to try to see if it's incremental. Let's hold out 10%, 5%. Do you have to be spending a certain amount on that? I mean, what about that?
Um, these questions are always tough because there's so many variables.
Sure.
I think a lot of people would be surprised by how low the bar is. I would say if you're spending probably over 100,000 on a platform per month, we could easily do something for you platform wide. Maybe even get away with like a multi-cell test if we're trying to validate specific strategies. It's really a question of spend as well as volume is really the other half of the coin. If I'm selling mattresses, $100,000 a month probably doesn't net me a ton of sales, and we're having a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm selling, I'm trying to think of something cheap, pens, because I have one on my hand, it's a whole different ball game. We could probably get away with a lot less and spend.
Sure. So as you're one of the jobs that you or the job that you have rather at Northbeam, one of the many hats you wear is working with clients to understand their path to purchase, the attribution, their journey, their MMM, that kind of thing. What are common things where people get tripped up in this? Just not even talking about incrementality. Um, but where common places people get tripped up in this? Is it that they have a predetermined idea of how the customer finds them and then the data shows a different story? Or where are you spending a lot of time walking through and educating people?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it, is people have a ton of preconceived notions about how their marketing program works. And then when they come to us and we've collected a little bit of data and they're taking the first look, they're shocked. I spend 80% of my budget on Facebook. Why isn't Facebook 80% of my attributed purchases? And then we have to walk them through like, well, here are your most common conversion paths. People are Googling or not clicking, they're seeing an ad, then they're hopping over to Google, clicking on a branded search ad, so on and so forth. And so I think it's getting people to come in with a sort of open mind is really the hardest part, or like ready to have their world rocked. I always say when I'm walking people through the platform, is numbers are going to look very scary, and that is okay because we're changing the whole grading rubric.
Right.
Um, yeah, but that's sometimes a tough ask.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, everybody's trying to, I feel like attribution is always tough. And I feel like incrementality is another level of this. And it's sort of been the buzzword of the last year and a half. And it's like, it was so piecemeal. And I think that's what you guys do well is it brings it into one place. And so it's an interesting thing in terms of how do we start to educate ourselves properly around path to purchase so that we can and truly what it means to like this is success to us and then all right look we need to introduce more channels. I think that we all know to a degree that having more channels is needed and being able to test them, but I think it's testing them and like seeing conversions come through their native platform is just not going to net you the best result. And so having it go through a third party and having it being incrementality tests is really huge. Like that is something that to do it well and to do it right moving forward, it has to be done that way. So yeah, well, Hamza, I appreciate your time and thank you for walking through this. If there's questions that people have, feel free to email me, Andrew at foxwelldigital.com. I believe there's a special deal for people that are on this. So if go ahead and shoot me a note if you're interested in talking to Northbeam about this, and we'll take care of getting that or mention my name, Andrew Foxwell, in the form that you're filling out to talk to Northbeam. They have a great set of people to chat with. But as always, the thing I love about partnering with you guys is you're here to make this easier for people. And that's like my whole entire ethos as well, right? It's just trying to make digital marketing not as trying to demystify it, right? And not as complex moving forward. So Hamza, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.